What's up, everybody? Congratulations on being done on the December SAT. I'm Laura with STP, obviously, and I have Puneet here with me. She's one of the most amazing tutors on our tutor team. What's up, Puneet?
I'm good. How are you, Laura?
Doing well. So, Puneet, you took the December SAT yesterday, right?
That's correct. That's correct.
Awesome. I'm so excited to ask you a whole bunch of questions today since you're an expert in this test. I'd love to hear your take on the December test. So the first question is, I think, one of the biggest questions that I have on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out in the room also have on your minds. And let me just say before I ask Puneet anything, just as a disclaimer, guys, try to, in the chat today, refrain from talking about specific questions on the test, okay? Because we're not supposed to talk about questions in detail. We won't be doing that today. That's definitely against College Board rules, and I don't want anyone to get in trouble, and I don't want anyone's score revoked. So just be careful with that. But yeah, so Puneet, the first question I have that I'm wondering right off the bat is, tests change from month to month. Like a lot of students complain that the March SAT early this year, the math was really hard. Then the October test rolled around and all the students were saying the English was really hard on that. What was your overall take on the December SAT as far as difficulty level?
Um, Now, as far as the difficulty is concerned, I think for me, the English was trickier than the math. The math questions were way more predictable and doable. But when it came to the English part, like the inference questions and the command of evidence questions, that really got me thinking. So I'd say that if for this particular test I had to choose, I'd say that the English part was harder than the math one. So yeah.
Well, yeah, and we just have to say as a disclaimer, guys, Puneet took the test in India. So she took an international version. Now, internationally and domestically in the US, there are variations to the test. So you're probably not getting the same test form as your friend that's sitting next to you. So, Puneet, do you want to speak on that a little bit? Because you tutored a lot of students in the States for the December test. Did they feel the same way as you?
Um, I would think that there was quite a bit of difference. So before I walked into the test, I was very nervous because I had always had this perception that the international SAT is difficult as compared to the one that's based in the States. But when I came back and I discussed it with my students based in the States, and the question types that they discussed with me, they were very different from what I had gotten on my test. So that just makes me think that in the US version of the test, the math part was more difficult than the English. Like most of my students were like, Puneet, the English was very doable. We used the strategies that you gave us, and it was very smooth for us. But when it came to math, there were certain questions that we just had to guess on them. And then there were one or two of my students who shared the same questions that I did. So it was very funny and it was very like mixed up. So you couldn't really say that, oh, the international one was completely different. But then, yes, there was a difference wherein for me, the English and for everybody around me also, the English part was where we got tricked up. But for the ones in the US, it was the math that was really hard.
That's so interesting. And like on the flip side, because I think there's different variations and different forms of the test, I had some students of mine in the US saying that they felt like the reading passages on the English were really involved, like quote unquote. I had a student say they were very involved. But what was interesting was I had a few students say that there was more grammar questions and more vocabulary questions than expected and less reading passages. Was that the same on your form or no?
I wouldn't say so. The reason behind that is I started my test from like number 15 as we always do and recommend our students to. And I just had that number of grammar questions only for the first module and for the second one as well. I guess it started from number 15 from me. So yeah, I particularly didn't see that difference anywhere.
Okay, interesting. So talking about like very involved reading passages, right? As you know, we just came out with some new reading strategies. I had that crash course last week. We had 130 students in it. It was awesome. I've taught you guys on the team the new reading strategies, and you're teaching them to your students now. in your opinion, did the new reading strategies help on the test?
Hmm. That's a very good question, because one of the things I wanted to do when I walked in the SAT room was to test those strategies myself. And to be honest, they did really work. When it comes to module one, you don't really require so much like focus. Even if you just go on to the last sentences and all the strategies that we were teaching our kids, they were absolutely effective.
Mhm.
However, I would say that when it comes to module two English, when I came down to, question numbers from 10 up till like 14 or 15, up till the inference questions, I did read the entire passage once, but after doing so, I really just focused on like the last sentence or the first sentence
Mhm.
based on the question type and how it aligned with our strategies. And I think it worked fine with me. And the reason why it helped me save time is usually what I would do is, if I read a passage once, I don't understand it, or I just want to read it again, I would read the entire thing again. But this time, all I did was I was either focusing just on the latter half of it or just on the former half,
Right.
and that just got me to my answer very easily. So I personally felt like they worked well enough. Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I mean, my November testing experience was way different than the June one, and I've shared that with everybody on social media so far. But when I got that 1590 on the November test, like on module two, I took a bathroom break. I was so relaxed. I had so much extra time. It was amazing because I'm like, there's so much fluff on this test. You know, I feel like College Board, they design questions with lots of extra information that's like extraneous. You don't need it to answer the question. So it's just identifying just the key parts. I think that's so important. And, you know, I just want to say to everybody out there watching right now that we actually updated our English workbook for 2025 with the new reading strategies. So you can actually go to our website right now, strategictestprep.com. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, you can get the workbook for free. So I just literally updated it this morning. It's hot off the press. I'm really excited for you guys to see what we've done and the changes we've made. So definitely go grab that from our website. All right, so here's the next thing. So you said the strategies went pretty well. You said you were nervous going in there, which I think is understandable. I feel like it's funny because like we're adults and it's not like we're applying to college, but it's still like nerve-wracking, right?
Exactly. The only thing that was different was when in the morning I was like getting ready and stuff. At that point, my heart was not beating. But the moment I sat down and I actually logged in and did everything, my heart it was just beating so fast. And I was like, hey, you don't have to submit these scores anywhere. Why are you so stressed? And I'm like, okay, maybe it's just the testing environment. It just happens. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and real quick, guys, just as a reminder, please don't talk about questions in the chat. I see some of you are starting to put some specifics in there. Again, you all have different forms. You probably didn't get the same questions. Even if you got the same questions, they changed the numbers. There's literally no point to talking about the specific questions in the chat, so please don't. But yeah, so I mean, my heart goes out to all the students that are taking the test because I'm like, if we're nervous, like, how are they feeling? But like one,
Exactly.
you know, my hope is when they work with us, they gain the confidence where at least they do feel more comfortable going in there than they would be going cold, right? But so I guess, Puneet, I'm wondering, what do you think you scored on this? Because you got a 1500 back on the paper test. So like if you had to estimate, what do you think?
That's okay. I think like I went when I went in there, I went with the target that okay, I do have to get like a 1550 plus. So I'm really hoping that I do get that score because I know I did well. It was just one question on the second math module that messed me up. And that was also because I had done that question, but I just forgot it and it just didn't click. But apart from that, I think I did the test pretty well. So that's what I'm assuming. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. Oh, I'll be interested to like see what happens. I mean, I definitely could see you getting above a 1550. Like, you know so much. You're just like such an expert. But even if you don't, it's your first one. You can always just go in and take it again. But yeah, don't worry. I won't fire you, I promise.
Oh, that's a relief. That's a relief. The fun thing is, when I went in, it like when I was gonna go for the test, I'll just share this. my best friend, she's like, okay, all the best, do your test well. And the other thing she says me, it's about your job. So you make sure you do the test well. And I'm like, oh, that makes me feel better. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Way to put the pressure on me, friend, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah,
Well,
that's right.
so, I've already emphasized what an expert I think you are in this. So, like, as someone who is an expert in the test that did go in and have the experience taking it in a testing center yesterday, what would be your biggest advice to a student? Like, what do you think they should study the most before going into a test like this? Or, like, do you have any advice for how they could best prepare?
Hmm. The one thing that I am now very confident about after having done the test myself is that the college board question bank is literally your Bible.
Mm-hmm.
If you memorize every single one of the questions over there, by memorize I don't mean cram, by memorize I mean you know all the concepts that have been provided in the question bank both for English and for math, I think you're good to go. Now obviously there are going to be questions in the latter half of the math section, or maybe there will be questions in the harder English module that will trick you up a little bit. That's something that we can't really predict. But if you are going there well prepared with whatever it is that's provided by the college board itself, it is the best thing. Because on my test, there were literally 5 questions on the harder module that were the exact replica of the college board question bank itself. They had just changed the numbers in there. And the reason why I know that was because that week itself, I was working on those questions with one of my students.
Yep.
And and I just knew them so well. So I mean, I was like, okay, these are just the same questions that they've already provided us with. So it's not like they're completely throwing us off the book, or they're just testing everything new and they're just not giving you any hints or any content. So I
Right.
think that's the best way to go ahead. And then for English particularly, I think our strategy workbook really comes in handy,
Mm-hmm.
especially for the standard English convention parts and the expression of ideas part. I think the kind of strategies we've provided, because I've worked on them with my student, they are the absolute best. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. And I second what you're saying about the question bank. And so College Board had a conference down in Austin, Texas last month. And they actually made an announcement that they're going to be adding thousands of questions into the question bank every year. Apparently, Puneet, they tested 155,000 unique questions on just the
Oh my
March,
God.
May, and June tests alone. So they have a ton of parent questions, and then they basically create variations to them, which is why I'm saying to you guys in the chat, there's like no point in talking about the questions, because they have like 50 different variations of a math problem where they change the numbers and everything. So, but yeah, they just added like 650 questions into the question bank this past month. And like they said that expect thousands this coming year, which is amazing. And so like at SCP, we always start with official materials, like why work with anything other than the official when things like this happen and you see the exact same questions on the test. I agree with you. I think third party stuff, like the Erica Meltzers, the College Pandas, all that is good as like supplementary material. But
Hmm.
really those official questions are where our students need to practice the most. Like I 110% agree with you on that.
Exactly. It's probably when you've already exhausted the college board question banks and you're like you literally remember every question to the T. That's when you can really explore Erica, or you can go ahead with College Panda. So yeah, that's my opinion as well.
Mm-hmm. Was there anything new concept-wise on this test? I mean, you can be vague in general. You don't need to go into specific details, but maybe like, was there like a certain math question from a certain category of math where it really surprised you or anything?
Okay, starting with math, like I never really expected exponential questions to pop in. Like, I mean, I know I worked on them with my students, but I was like, okay, there'll be like one question on exponents and that's all. But the fun thing is, I got like 2 or 3 questions just based on exponents on my second module, which was something very new for me. And the funny thing is, just before the test day, I was working with one of my students, and I told her that exponents are not so like explicitly tested on the SAT, and they just popped up out of nowhere. I was like, okay, I was wrong. And so that's one thing I noticed. And then I've been telling my students this a lot, and now I can literally vouch for it. They love experimenting with geometry. I don't know why. Like, they
Mm,
might not experiment with anything else, but for geometry, they'll just come up with a new concept and they'll be like, okay, now we expect you to solve it. Based on
mhm.
what they have given us in the question banks, geometry seems very doable. So this is one area that I would definitely agree that the questions that they provide to us in the question bank are way easier than what pops up on the actual test itself. But then
Okay,
those are just one or two questions. So maybe they could be experimental or you never know. For
right.
English, I wouldn't say there was any new category, but I would say that this time the standard English convention questions were like, how do I put it? I've started observing some patterns in standard English convention questions because they all just became so predictable after one point.
Right,
But then
right.
there were one or two questions on this test. So what I, literally did was I wasn't even looking at the passage. I was looking at the options. I was predicting the answer because
Yeah, I
more
do that
than
too.
getting a better score, I was like, I want to see if the strategies I'm teaching are working or not. Okay. So when I did that, there were two questions for which the strategy didn't work out well because they were different from what the question bank has typically provided us with. But other than that, everything was just the same. So yeah.
Uh-huh. I think that that's just a testament to the strategies are great to teach as fallbacks. Like if a student's stuck, I'm like, okay, go to your strategies. What can you do to give yourself the highest chance of getting the point? But like we have a lot of high flyers, right? And I feel like for them, they need to be ready for these nuanced use cases where the strategies don't apply, So I think it's
Exactly.
interesting that you say that because I've also noticed that as well. You know what I've noticed too, just side note, I've noticed gerunds coming up as the right answers a lot on like verb
Oh
tense
my God.
questions. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I've started memorizing that pattern. I've made a list of all the ways that you could typically get a gerund. And there's always one question on both modules. I've never seen more than one question, but
Uh-huh.
there's gonna be one question that's gonna pop up about gerunds. And my students are like, Puneet, isn't this a subject verb agreement question? And I'm like,
They
no.
have a tough time with it. Yes, exactly. I would love to
Exactly.
get that list. You're going to have to share it at our next team meeting. That would be
Yeah,
great.
definitely, definitely. Because I mean, there's just one or two types. Trust me, there's just one or two, and then you just got to memorize it. Because I feel like, I remember you putting up a problem, and then I explained how there's a modifier connection and stuff. That's a long story. But that was actually the concept which justifies those gerund uses. But yeah, I don't know why I like to test it. So yes.
Yeah. Hey guys, if you're here watching this video and you have any questions for Puneet and I, go ahead and type them in the chat and we'll pick out like one or two and answer your questions. So let's go to the next question I have for you, Puneet. We have various execution strategies. Now, you mentioned you did the start at 15 and go to the end. So I've
Hmm.
got this other one that I just started using. It's pretty awesome. It's start at 27 and go backwards. And I like this one because the note-taking questions are easy. So I feel like it warms up my brain. And then you get into some of the quicker ones like the transitions and the grammar. And then what I like to do is I feel like numbers 15 to 11 are the toughest reading passages. So I skip
Hmm.
those and save those for last and then go do the other ones all the way through to the words and context and come back. And so that's been working really well because I feel like it reminds me of like a math module, how math modules get harder as you go, and then you can skip any hard math questions along the way. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but I guess my question for you is sometimes I find on module 2 that block from like 15 to 11, there's like 2 or 3 really tricky reading questions in there where you actually have to annotate and like write stuff down to keep track. Like I notice you have to sometimes compare two things, like you might have to compare two types of steel, or they'll give you two different countries and they'll talk about like something about the countries. So I like to make a T chart and then compare and write down all the facts on each side because some of these it's just so hard to keep track of what's going on. Did you have to annotate on any of the reading questions on module 2?
So the weirdest thing that happened with me was I didn't get a chance to do any of the blue book tests before the actual test. I thought I'd just give one test so I'd get accustomed to the pattern and stuff. But I was just so occupied with college and tutoring that I couldn't do it.
Right.
When I went into the test, I didn't know how to annotate. And that messed me up very bad. I couldn't even see the option to do that. Second thing, I couldn't see the option of marking the answer choice for review. Like I didn't know how to do that. So that was a
Mhm.
big mistake on my part. I should have tested those earlier. So what I had to do was on the piece of paper that I had, I literally had to write down the questions that I have to come back to so that
Yep.
I don't end up forgetting them. So that was pretty bad for me. But to be honest, because I worked on a, like, I did my test on a laptop, and I don't feel comfortable annotating without my stylus. So that's the reason why I didn't even feel like there was a need to use annotation for this particular test. It went very smoothly for me. There were one or two sentences when it came to the inference questions that they were really tricking me up, and I just needed to focus on that particular sentence. So what I simply did was I just selected the entire sentence and then I just focused on it and then looked at all the option choices. So
Mm.
that's how I worked my way through it. But if I had known, I would have definitely highlighted it and then worked my way through it. So that was a stupid mistake.
Well, that's okay though. I mean, that's why I like to have everyone on our team get in and actually do a real test, because we know the concepts and we know the content. And that's what we're doing with our students in the sessions, right? We're teaching them that. But it's a whole other thing to actually get in there and do it yourself, because now you're going to have this experience under your belt where you can even better understand your student's position, give them even better like insight and guidance before they get into the test. So I think it was like a very valuable exercise. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I do now know that I have to, like, I mean, I always did this. So whenever one of my students said that, Puneet, I've never used annotation before, but they've even exhausted all the 6 Blue Book tests, I'd specifically tell them that I want you to give a test just so you can become comfortable with the annotation option, because I
Right,
don't want you to step in the test and be like, okay, I'm not even comfortable with it and I'm just spending too much time on it. So that's
right.
something I don't want them to do. I've been suggesting this for so long, and then I forgot to do it myself.
Yeah.
But yes, that's very important. You need to be very familiar with all the tools that are there, all the options that are there. So on the test day, it's just on your tips. You know, okay, I have to click here, I have to click here, and you're good to go. So yes.
Right. You know, it's funny, like that annotation tool is helpful sometimes, but sometimes I find it to be cumbersome where I'll just use my scrap paper. Like, for instance, making the T chart, right? You can't make a T chart in Blue Book exam. So I'll just write a T chart down on my paper. You know, another time I like to just write on my paper is sometimes you'll get a passage that gives you lots of dates and events.
Hmm.
And it's like, oh, and then in 1150, you know, this book was published. And then in, you know, 1050 BC, though, they didn't have gold. And like, then they want you to come up with some conclusion about it. And I can't keep track of all that stuff. So I'll like draw a timeline on my paper and map out each event and like put them on the timeline. And then if they have, you know, like the cutoff is 1100 and they want to know what could have plausibly happened in 1100, I can see what happened before and after a lot easier. So I think it's just important, like for our students to be flexible with that stuff. Like, hey, sometimes you can use the annotation tool, sometimes just write on your paper, you know, and so that's one thing that I find. It's a skill that I think going into 2025 we can work on with our students more, because it's difficult. It's
Hmm.
difficult for people to think about, okay, what am I going to write down? How do I write this down so I can not waste a lot of time, you know what I mean? But yeah, I find that to be like one of the harder things to teach students to do. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Anyways, so I guess, okay, so here's another question that I have for you. How was your testing environment? Because you took an international test in Mumbai, right? Did you feel like it was like conducive to doing well, or was it very noisy? Were there any issues in your testing center today or yesterday?
Um, Luckily, no. The testing it was very good. We had just like I remember when I gave the SAT, like when I gave the pen and paper based SAT, there were like 15-ish students in the hall that we gave the test in. But in the
Wow.
classroom, yeah, but in the classroom that we gave the test in this time, there were just like 7 or 8 students. And it was just so quiet and it was just so well spaced. And the environment was so quiet because it was a Saturday, so the school was off. There was nobody there, was just the SAT kids. The only thing which I didn't like was the fact that they could have started the test at exactly the same time for everybody, because what happened is one of the students
Mm.
in our class, she came in late. But because all of us had already started the test before her, what happened is when we got that 10-minute break, there was a lot of noise in our class. So I really feel like the invigilators, they could have really made sure that, okay, we just step out or we just maintain silence so that she isn't getting disturbed. So I kind of felt bad for her. And then when we were about to reach the end of our harder math module, like the end of the test, I guess we had just like maybe 3 or 4 minutes left. I think the students in our adjacent classroom, they were already done. So they just popped out of their class and was so noisy. And I was like, okay, I'm on my last question here, please. And then maybe somebody just told them to keep quiet or something. So that was the only thing that icked me a little bit. But apart from that, everything was really good. They had good arrangements for charging if anybody needed that. And yeah, everything else was pretty good.
That's awesome. Yeah, your experience sounds similar to mine. I was shocked last month when I went to my testing center because there was only like 20 kids. And I've been to that testing center before, and there was like hundreds on different months. November is just not a very popular test, at least
Hmm.
here in my region. So it was nice and quiet. It was very calm and peaceful. There wasn't a lot of chaos. And I feel like having that kind of testing environment, it really sets you off in the right foot. Like I just felt very
Hmm.
zen, when I was in the test. um,
Exactly, exactly. It's all very quiet. So yeah, it's not disturbing at all.
Yeah. Mentally, like, is there anything you would recommend that your students do to prepare? I mean, because I know, like, we talked about getting nervous and things like that. Like, what do you think a
Hmm.
student can do to get centered and feel prepared mentally on test day?
I think the best thing that you can do is to be on time. The reason behind that is once you're on time, you can really get settled there. You can become a little bit comfortable and familiar with your testing environment. And plus, once you're like, for me, this really works. That if I'm once settled down, I've logged in, I've done all the necessary things I have to do. I then just like to take a few deep breaths, and I'm like, okay, I got this, and that just makes me feel better. So that's the number one thing I do. The number two thing that I'd really recommend everybody, which is not so mental but more so physical, is that before you go for your test, I would recommend you do like 5 random math questions and 5 random English questions. Like, even
Mhm.
if you would want to do the easier ones, that's fine. I remember us giving our students that one like SAT test day kind of a questionnaire that they had to do before they went in for the test. And you don't even have to look at your answers. Now, the reason why that really works is because it gets your brain to think. So you really start working before you actually appear for the test itself. So that's
Mhm.
really helpful for you, and it really helps you save time, and it just ignites you up before you show up for the test itself.
Yeah, I agree. I would like to make a math one because we have that warm up set. I think it's like 7 or 8 easy English questions for our students, but I don't think a math one would hurt either. We should probably hand select some easy questions in different categories, testing different concepts. Um, Maybe we could whittle it down so there's 5 and 5, like you were saying, because I feel like we don't want it to be like 20 questions. That could be a little bit cumbersome, but 10 seems like the perfect amount. So let's sync up on that and maybe like make a even better warm up for 2025.
Yeah, that sounds fun. That makes
Yeah.
absolute sense.
Yeah. Okay. Did you overhear any student conversations? Just curious, like when you were leaving the test or during the breaks, what were other students saying about the test? And I mean, obviously they can't talk about the test questions or anything, but did you hear anyone say, "Oh, that's so hard," or "That was so easy," or anything like that?
Yeah, so when we got the 10 minutes break post the English modules, that's when we just stepped outside, and there were these 2 kids who were like the girl who was discussing it was just sitting in front of me, and the boy was right next to me, and they were just discussing, oh, I am pretty confident I got the harder English module because the questions were very difficult. And I was just standing there because I didn't know anybody. And
Yeah.
then she just comes up to me and she's like, "Oh, how did your test go up till now?" And I was like, "It was nice." And she was just shocked. She's like, "How was it nice? It was so difficult." And then I had to console her. So I told her that, okay, I'm a tutor. I'm not
Right.
giving this test. They have to get an admission. So then they're like, oh, that's fascinating. And then the two of them would, yeah, they were discussing how the English module was definitely tricky for them. And then once the math one ended, I just came back home and they also rushed through. So I couldn't overhear any conversations for the math one. But for English, yeah, everyone was talking about how difficult the second module was.
I just want to address a question from Femi. Femi said, I didn't do a full-length practice test on Blue Book, but I did test preview. Would that affect my result? Femi, it sounds like you're newer to prepping, so I would definitely recommend, you do a full-length practice test, at least one, before you go into your next test, because you want to work on your timing, you want to work on, you want to get a feel for what it's like, you want to work on your endurance. So taking those full tests are super important. Honestly, if you guys really, really want to do this thing, I would say take all of the Blue Book tests at least twice. Like, become an expert on the Blue Book tests, because that's what we do for a living. And that's why it's so easy for us to look at a question and go, oh, this is what they're testing here. This is how you do it. So yeah, like I do think that you have to do full length practices. Puneet, do you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely. I mean, I've already emphasized it enough, but if you're really stepping into the center well prepared, then your preparation really involves becoming familiar with all the six Blue Book tests. That's for sure. And then just like we mentioned, I didn't just try out a test. So that didn't work out well in my favor. So I think becoming accustomed to as many Blue Book tests as possible is gonna work out really well.
Yeah, and I'll say I was fortunate enough to have some time before I went into the November, and I already knew all the Blue Book tests, so I couldn't take a Blue Book test because at this point it was like, well, it's not going to be an accurate indication of my score. So I actually took PSAT tests too, because I was like, okay, here's a test that I can get in the interface. I don't really know the questions of PSAT test two. And it made me, honestly, it helped me feel so prepared. I feel like the English questions on PSAT test two, the difficulty level is in line with the SAT. I think it's something else we can use with our students when they run out of the Blue Book tests. Even PSAT test one, same time limits, same amount of questions. The only difference is it's missing 20% of the math because it doesn't include all of algebra 2. But for English especially, like, we could get our students into the PSAT tests. Also, College Board said they're going to release 2 more SAT tests this spring, hopefully before the March test. Honestly, I'm anticipating they're going to show up in January or February, which is really
Oh, that's
exciting.
good. Yes,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there are some of my students who are going to be continuing till March because for them the March one is going to be the final one, and they've already exhausted all the six. So you mentioned this already, so I was just telling them, let's just hold on to this hope. You'll get 2 more tests, and then we'll know, okay, what's there to come. So yeah.
Right. And yeah, so we have some third-party platforms that I'm looking to partner with, just in the event that, like, I know I've already done like something with Blue Prep, and so I just have to whittle down to, I think, the one that's going to fit for us best, because I do want to have an alternative for students who are done with all those tests. So I'll let you guys know at the next team meeting what else we're going to use as well. I just want to make sure whatever we go with, the tests are in line with what the Blue Book tests look like and the official materials, but we can keep hammering on that question bank too. Somebody else asked a question in here about 30 points. They said, are some questions worth 30 points? Yes, some questions are worth 30 points, because I ran a bunch of trials on the Blue Book test, and I purposefully got one question wrong on math module 2, and it dropped me down to a 770. So I think that the questions range. Some are worth 10, some are worth 20, some are worth 30, based on difficulty level. So that's pretty much what I've been seeing. Puneet, do you have anything to add to that as far as like score
Not really.
algorithm? Yeah.
I didn't really know that. Up until now, I was just thinking every question has the same weightage. I really didn't know that.
Well, we have that website that we can use. It's like, what's it called? Like if you guys Google digital SAT score calculator, it'll come up. I think it's
Mhm.
albert.io. So
That's
sometimes,
right. That's right.
yeah. So like if they're doing like a linear non-adaptive test on paper, I might type in their results into albert.io to see hypothetically what they'd score. But I don't really know how I think it's like probably like a linear algorithm, to be honest with you. So I always tell my students, hey, listen, this is an estimate. We don't know for sure because that scoring algorithm from College Board is elusive and it's really hard to drill
Exactly.
down on. But yeah,
And
okay.
plus, when you're just putting it into a score calculator, the score calculator doesn't know the question type that you got wrong. So it can't really show that 10, 20, 30 point variation. But when you're doing a test on Blue Book, it'll obviously do that. So yeah, that does
Right.
make sense.
Exactly. Okay. I have someone said, predictions about March 2025. What should I do?
Let's
Ooh, that's a
go.
good question. Good question. Puneet, you want to take that first, or I mean, do you have any
Hmm.
advice for March? Getting ready for March?
I I mean, I think for now, like what I always recommend all my students is just watch all the prediction videos so far
Yes.
because you're gonna get those questions mixed and matched. Definitely. I mean, obviously, if it's the December test, the December predictions are gonna work the best, but you never know. All the other predictions that have shown up so far, they're all gonna work really well. So what I'd recommend is the harder questions now have started following kind of a similar pattern. The regression problems, they're one of the hardest ones. The geometry problems, they're the hardest ones. So if you really want to amp up your score, I think you should first start off by building your basics. And when you're really good with that, then practice the harder geometry, become perfect at Desmos. That's what
Mm,
I'd recommend for math. For English more so, I think you need to have all the rules of grammar on your tips, and you need to focus on having different strategies for different reading questions. I always tell my students that if you're stepping into every question with the same strategy, that means you're not really learning so much. Every question is designed differently, which means there must be a different strategy for every question as well. So I
right.
think those are the areas that you must be focusing on.
Right. I agree with that. And I definitely think that if like we even have on our YouTube channel a like a playlist, a predictions playlist. So you could literally go to our playlist, play the predictions playlist, and watch every video. What I have found is every school year, so starting in August, they do add in new types of questions. But if we're talking March, August, October, November, December, that's all this school year. So March will be in line with those to a certain extent. But even the ones from last year that I did for the international kids, I think could help. So I think that's a really good suggestion. And then I have, let's see, we have someone, um, gamers, RNK said, I face two module easy in English. Okay, so basically they got the second module was easier in English. What can I score maximum in English? Gamers, you're going to top off at a 600 max if you get the easy second module. So that basically means getting every single question right on the second module for that to happen. I ran some trials and that seems like that's the ceiling for you. So if you did get the easy second module, you just got some work to do. So it's time to go back to the drawing board and just keep prepping and keep working on those fundamental areas so that you can get enough questions right. You should aim to get less than 10 questions wrong on module 1. If you get less than 10 questions wrong on module 1, you will likely get the harder second module. So that's what you're really going to want to focus on. Puneet, are you ready for a lightning round?
Oh
I just,
yes,
I
for
just have
sure.
some quick questions for you. I ask everybody these. So let's start with, do you hide the clock or show the clock?
Show the clock.
How much scrap paper did you use?
I got one, so there were four sites, so I used all the four.
Oh, nice.
So it was
Do
just
you,
one. Yeah,
do you use a pen or a pencil?
I used a pen.
Okay. iPad, laptop, or Chromebook? You already answered this, but
Yeah, I got a laptop. Yeah.
laptop. Okay. And what do you think was the percent of questions you used Desmos on to solve the math?
Yes. It's the math was so easy on the first module that I first did it by myself, and then because I had so much time left, I just did the entire module on Desmos because I like let's just recheck it. And then
Yep.
for the second one also, I did the exact same thing. But okay, if rationally speaking, I were to say, I would say that like maybe 50% of the questions because I always feel like if you have something that's so objective in calculations, why do you want to calculate yourself and make a mistake? Just use it to the best.
Exactly. I also use Desmos to check my answers on module one because I feel like module one, even though it's so easy, it's also very easy to make a careless mistake because it's so easy. So I think that that's a good
Exactly.
strategy to go back and redo it a different way. That's super smart. Puneet, we have like basically our December cohort of students is done, right? And so just curious, are you accepting new students for
Mhm.
2025?
Absolutely. I'm always open to more students. You know, I love tutoring. So yeah, I'm open to more students. Yes.
Awesome. So, guys, if you like what Puneet had to say today, keep that in mind. She's available. I don't think she's going to be available for that long, though. But we are definitely taking new students right now for 2025. So you can head to our website to learn more and book a consult. That's strategictestprep.com. Puneet, thanks so much for coming on today. I had a lot of fun.
I also had a lot of fun. Thank you so much. I hope the session was insightful for everyone. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure it was. It definitely was. Thank you. Bye, everybody. We'll see you again soon.